I only meant to stop for 5 minutes. Past midnight on a mountain road in northern New York. A woman stood beside a dead luxury sedan with her arms wrapped around herself. I did not know her name. I knew she was freezing, her phone was dead, and she refused to let me call the police. I could not revive the car, so I brought her to my little shop, gave her a blanket, and made the cheap coffee I make for anybody. Then dawn came, and 12 black SUVs blocked my gate. She walked out, and every one of them called her a name that stopped my heart. If you love stories where quiet kindness is looked down on and then flips all the power, subscribe and stay to the end. My name is Nolan Pierce, and at 41 years old, I had learned to measure my life in small, honest numbers. 12:17 in the morning was the time on the cracked clock of my Ford pickup when I came down off the ridge, after rebuilding the generator at a lodge that had lost power in a storm. My hands smelled like diesel and burnt insulation. My daughter was asleep at my sister's place because I had told her I would be late, and being late for her was the only debt I ever felt ashamed of. The heater in the truck worked when it felt like working, and that night it did not feel like working, so I drove with the window cracked to keep the glass clear. That is the whole picture of me. A man in a dirty jacket, driving home alone, thinking about nothing more complicated than sleep. Then my headlights found her. There was a sedan pulled tight against the shoulder, where the guardrail bent around a blind curve, hazard lights blinking slow and weak, the way lights blink when a battery has already given up on itself. A woman stood beside the rear door in a wool coat that had never seen a hardware store, and she did not wave at me. She just watched the truck come, the way people watch weather. I passed her. I want to be honest about that, because I think honesty is the only thing I have ever owned outright. I drove maybe 40 yards up the road, telling myself that a woman alone at midnight does not want a stranger in coveralls slowing down beside her, and that the smartest kindness is sometimes distance. But there was no signal on that stretch. I knew it because I had lost calls there 100 times, cursing at a phone that showed 1 bar and meant 0. If her phone was dead, and if she was waiting for a service she had already called, then she was waiting for nothing at all. The temperature that night was going to drop into the low 20s by 3 in the morning, and that car had no way to make heat. I thought about my daughter walking home from practice, and about all the men in the world who might slow down for her, and about the fact that the world only stays the right reasons, because a few of them stop for the right reasons. So I turned the truck around in a gravel pullout and came back with my dome light on so she could see my face before I ever got close. She did not relax when she saw me. Good. I would have worried about her judgment if she had. I stopped a full car length behind her bumper, left my headlights on her instead of on me, and got out slow, with my hands loose and visible. I did not smile too much, because men who smile too much at midnight are the ones you should run from. "Do you want me to look at the car?" I asked, and I stayed where I was while I said it, boots planted in the frost, letting her decide how much road belonged to her. She studied me for maybe 4 seconds, which is a long time when you are being studied. Then she said her name was Genevieve, and nothing else. No last name, no explanation, no small talk about how terrible her night had been. That surprised me a little. Most people, when they are stranded, hand you their whole story in the first breath, because it makes them feel less helpless. She handed me nothing but her first name and a look that said she had spent her life deciding how much of herself to go on, to give away, and had gotten very good at it. The hood was already warm when I put my palm on it, which told me she had not been sitting there long. I asked her to try the ignition, and I listened. There was no crank, no click of a starter solenoid working against a weak battery. Just the soft electronic sigh of a car that had drained itself and given up. I got my light and looked, and what I found was not the simple story of headlights left on. The charging system had failed somewhere upstream, and the vehicle had been running on stored power until the stored power ran out. Modern cars do not let you jump that back to life on a mountain shoulder with a set of cables and good intentions. It needed a bay, a scanner, and daylight. I told her exactly that in plain words, without dressing it up. She asked whether it could be towed, and I said yes. But the only service that would come to that mile of road closed at 10 and did not answer after that, and the next nearest one was over the county line and would not touch a car like hers without a flatbed and a morning appointment. I offered to drive her to the service station down in the valley, so she could wait somewhere with lights and a vending machine. And then I remembered that the station had gone to seasonal hours in October and was locked and black by 11. So I stood there in the cold, telling a well-dressed stranger that there was nowhere in 40 miles for her to go tonight, except with me. "If you don't trust me, you can stay here," I said. "I'll leave you my thermos and a blanket, and I'll come back at first light with a flatbed. I just don't think tonight's temperature is a good idea." I meant it as a genuine option, not as pressure, and I think she heard that. She asked if I had somewhere she could sit until morning that was not my house, and I said yes, my shop, an office with a couch and a bad space heater, and a door that locks from the inside. She asked for my full name. I gave it, along with my business license number, and the name of the lodge whose generator I had just fixed, and told her she was welcome to check every word of it when she had a working phone. Then she got in. She kept her purse in her lap like it was a seatbelt. I turned the radio off because silence felt more polite than whatever late-night station was fading in and out, and for the first 4 miles, neither of us said anything at all. But I noticed something, and it stuck in me the way a wrong sound in an engine sticks in me. She kept checking the side mirror. Not once, not the way you check on a car you are sorry to leave behind. Over and over, watching the dark road behind us, as if the thing she had abandoned back there was not the only thing she was worried about following her. I unlocked the office and put the space heater on and shut the bay door so the cold could not come around the corner at her. The office is 9 feet by 12. There is a couch that came out of a motel liquidation in the 90s, a desk with a lamp, a coffee maker older than my truck, a bulletin board, and a window that looks out on the concrete pad where I do my fabrication work. I brought her 2 clean blankets out of the cabinet where I keep them for winter breakdowns, plugged her phone into the wall charger, and started coffee because the only hospitality I had was hot and bitter and free. She sat on the edge wagon road. She sat on the edge with her coats still on and watched the shop the way people watch a language they do not speak. Later she told me she had spent 20 years in rooms with marble floors and glass walls, where the coffee came from a machine that cost more than my welder, and that she had learned to read those rooms perfectly, and that my office had short-circuited every instinct she owned. Because I did not ask her anything. I did not ask what she did for a living, or what that sedan cost, or why a woman dressed like that was driving a mountain road alone at midnight, or who she was running from. I have found that when a person wants you to know something, they tell you, and when they do not, asking only makes them lie. There was an envelope pinned there at the top right. Heavy cream stock, a return address in Manhattan, and a logo I had come to hate in a specific and personal way. Ashbourne Meridian Development. I crossed the room and took it down before I even decided to, folded it in half, and put it in my back pocket like a man hiding a diagnosis. It was a stupid reflex. She had already read it. She asked me carefully whether I did work for them, and something in the way she asked made me look at her a second longer than I needed to. I told her the truth because I was tired, and because it was midnight, and because there did not seem to be any harm in it. That company was building a logistics and distribution campus on the far side of the ridge, a project everybody in the valley called North Ridge, and over 3 years their subsidiaries had bought nearly every parcel that touched mine. Farm ground, timber lots, the old Whitfield dairy, the strip along the county road. My 11 acres and my shop sat in the middle of it now like a nail. Somebody had failed to hammer flat. And 2 months ago, one of those subsidiaries had sent me a letter stating that my access lane, the only lane, the gravel road my grandfather graded in 1951, crossed land they now owned, and that my right to use it was, in their word, unsupported. They offered to buy the shop and the acreage. The number was less than half of what the property and the equipment were worth, and I told them so, and their answer was a second letter that used the phrase good faith 4 times while explaining that if I did not sell, they would begin proceedings to close the lane, and that a business without legal access is a business without value. I have a folder from my father with a recorded document from 1987 confirming a permanent right-of-way, but I also have a bank balance. And a lawyer in Albany had already told me gently that fighting a company with billions of dollars over an easement is not a legal question, it is a spending question, and I would run out of money in the 8th month of a case that would take 4 years. You must hate people like that, she said finally, and it was not an accusation, it was almost a test. I thought about it honestly. I thought about the couple who bought the lake house and paid me triple to keep their boat running, because they knew what my time was worth. I thought about the lodge owner who still shakes my hand with both of hers. And then I thought about a letter that used the word unsupported about a road my grandfather built, with a borrowed grader and his own back. I don't hate rich people, I told her. I hate people who think money gives them the right to edit the truth. She looked at me for a long moment then, longer than was comfortable, and I could not read what was moving behind her face. Then she said good night, and I went out to the bay and slept 4 hours in the reclined seat of a customer's Suburban with my coat over me, because there was exactly one couch, and I was not going to make her argue with me about it. 5:46 in the morning. I know the time because I had just checked my phone to see if the flatbed dispatcher had opened, and I was standing at the walk-in door with the key in the lock and my breath white in front of me. The sky over the ridge was the color of a nickel, Frost had made the gravel loud. And under the ordinary sounds of a mountain morning, I heard engines, more than one, coming up the frontage lane in a way that vehicles never come up my lane, which is to say with purpose and in formation. The first SUV came around the bend of the tree line, and I thought it was lost. Black, new, tinted so dark I could not see a driver. Then the second one came through behind it, and the third, and by the fourth I had stopped counting and started calculating, because a man who lives alone at the end of a private road learns to calculate. They came in one after another, unhurried, and they fanned out across the gravel pad in a shape that was clearly practiced. 3 across the mouth of the lane, the rest in an arc facing my building. 12. 12 black SUVs with their headlights on in the gray light, engines idling, exhaust rolling low across the frozen ground. My first thought was not about myself. My first thought was that the woman asleep in my office had refused to let me call the police, that she had watched the mirror the whole way down the mountain, and that whatever she was afraid of had just found her in my shop. I put my phone in my hand, without dialing. I did not go for anything else. I have a shop full of tools that could hurt a man, and not one of them belonged in that moment. Because 12 vehicles arriving in daylight are not an ambush. They are an announcement, and I have lived long enough to know the difference. Behind me, the office door opened. I heard it, and I turned, and Genevieve came out with her coat over her arm and her hair pulled back and her chin up, looking at 12 SUVs. 12 SUVs on my gravel, the way a teacher looks at a room that has gotten out of hand. And the older man exhaled all at once and said, "Monsieur Ashbourne." Thank God. Ashbourne. I felt it land in my chest like a dropped wrench. The same 9 letters that were folded in the back pocket of the jeans I was still wearing. The same name on the letter that told me the road my grandfather built was unsupported. I looked at her, and she was already looking at me, and I watched her realize, in real time, exactly what I had just put together, and I watched her decide not to look away from it. That is the first thing I ever admired about her. The older man introduced himself to me because she made him. Gideon Cross, Director of Security for the family. 26 years in the job. The kind of man who says 4 words where other men say 40. What he explained in those 4-word increments was almost mundane once you heard it. Her sedan carried a telematics link that reported position and status continuously, and when the car lost both signal and power in a dead zone at 12:14 in the morning, an escalation protocol fired. There was no location, no voice contact, and no answer for 5 hours. So they had swept every road off the ridge with everything they had. Security, 2 assistants, counsel, and half a dozen people who had already been driving north for an emergency board meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock that same morning. Because Genevieve was not simply a member of the Ashbourne family. She was the chair of the board and the controlling owner of Ashbourne Meridian Group, and the woman who had slept under a motel blanket on my couch had spent the previous evening in a meeting whose existence she had not explained to anyone in her own building. I had made her instant coffee in a stained cup and asked her nothing. I had folded a letter from her own company into my back pocket, so a stranger would not see me being crushed. I stood there in a dirty jacket, doing that math, while 12 engines idled, and I honestly could not tell you whether I wanted to laugh or sit down. But the real shock had not arrived yet. The last SUV in the line, the one that had parked farthest back with its nose angled out toward the road, opened. A man stepped down onto my gravel, in a charcoal cashmere overcoat, gloves in one hand, and paused to look at the front of my building, the way a health inspector looks at a kitchen. He was tall, well-kept, expensively rested. He glanced at Genevieve, then at me, and I watched his mouth change shape before he ever spoke. Sterling Ashbourne. Her cousin. Executive vice president of the company that wanted my road. He did not greet me. He did not thank me. He walked past two of his own security people, stopped 6 feet away, and let his eyes travel from my work, boots up through my jeans to the jacket with the burn mark on the sleeve, and the collar dark from 11 years of the same collar. Then he said, to her, not to me, Genevieve, "You were here all night?" The word "here" did the work of an entire insult, and it did it efficiently, the way a man does something he has practiced. "For your trouble," he said. I did not take it. I did not put my hands in my pockets to make a point either. I simply did not move. And I let the money hang there, in the cold air between us, until it became a thing he was doing, rather than a thing I was refusing. Behind him, one of the assistants looked at the ground. Gideon Cross looked at the tree line and kept his face empty, but I have been read by men, and I have also learned to read them. And I would swear he was enjoying himself somewhere very deep down. Sterling did not like that. His hand came down, and his voice went flat and pleasant, which I have found is what contempt sounds like. When it has been to a good school, people like you don't usually turn down cash, he said, and I heard underneath it the whole doctrine of the man, that there is a category called people like you, that the category is defined by price, and that the only question is which number opens the door. Maybe you haven't met enough people like me, I said. Genevieve told him to apologize. She said it quietly, without heat, the way a person speaks when they are used to being obeyed, and are noticing that they are not being obeyed. Sterling actually laughed, one syllable of it. You want me to apologize, he said, to a man who fixes cars. And there it was in the open, on my own gravel, with a dozen employees within earshot, not anger at me, because anger would have required him to consider me a person. Just amusement, that I had been placed on the same level as himself for the length of a sentence. What made it worse, what still puts a hard edge in my chest when I think about it, was what happened when the wind caught the corner of the folded envelope in my back pocket. It came loose and hit the gravel, and Sterling looked down at it before I could bend. He read his own logo. He read the address. And he did not look surprised at all. He straightened up with something almost like satisfaction and said, "Ah, the shop that's holding up North Ridge. You should take the buyout while it exists," he told me. Then he tucked his gloves under his arm and glanced at Genevieve as though the matter were now filed. "The lane crosses our parcel, that's settled," he said. Settled the way a man says it when he is the one who settled it. I watched her face change. It was not a large change. Her chin came down a fraction, and her eyes went very still. And I recognized it because it was the same look she had worn on my couch when I told her about the second letter. Only sharper now, and aimed at someone. I would learn later that she had been told North Ridge had a handful of routine local disputes, minor holdouts, nothing that required her attention. She had just heard her own executive vice president describe a man's livelihood as a settled obstacle. in that man's driveway. 12 hours after that man had driven her off a freezing mountain for nothing. "Don't sign anything today." I said, "All right." She held my eyes a beat to be sure I meant it, and then she went and got into the second SUV. And I saw Sterling's head turn. He had been 3 steps toward his own door, and he stopped and looked back at us, with a stillness that did not match the rest of him. It was small. Most people would have missed it. But I make my living hearing the one bearing in a machine that is running a little wrong, and something in that man had just started running a little wrong. At 3:20 that afternoon, a gray crossover came up my lane, and 2 people got out of it with a leather folio, and I knew before either of them opened their mouths. They were real estate representatives for Ashbourne Meridian, a man about 35 and a woman about 50, and they were polite in the way that has been trained, rather than felt. They said they had a final offer. They said the window was closing. They put the folio on my workbench, right on top of my torque wrench, which I minded more than I should have. I read the number twice. The new offer was lower than the old one. $19,000 lower, which is not a rounding error to a man like me, and the reason given was a revised valuation reflecting access. Uncertainty. Read that again the way I did, standing at my own bench with grease on my thumb. They had created the access uncertainty. Then they had used it to reduce what they were willing to pay. It was the cleanest circle I have ever seen drawn, and they drew it without any apparent awareness that it was a circle at all. The man explained pleasantly that if I did not execute the agreement by end of business Friday, the company would proceed with a formal notice to close the lane under the updated parcel survey, and that once the notice was filed, the offer would be withdrawn entirely because the asset would then be, and I am quoting the phrase that is still stuck in my head, functionally unmarketable. I asked to see the updated survey. He said it was an internal document. I asked who had prepared it. He said he was not the right person to answer that. And then the woman, who had been quiet, decided to help. She looked around my shop and she said, with something that was almost kindness on the surface of it, "You had 5 minutes with the chair of Ashbourne. Don't let that convince you you've become important." I have replayed that sentence more times than any other from that week, because that is the second layer of it, the one people miss. The first layer is a man in cashmere who thinks you can be tipped. The second layer is everyone below him who has learned that thinking as a job requirement and who says it to your face, believing they are giving you good advice. The deed instrument from 1987 was there, recorded, stamped, with the language my father had paid a country lawyer $400 to insist on. A permanent right-of-way appurtenant to the parcel, running with the land, not extinguished by any subsequent conveyance, transfer, subdivision, or change of ownership of the servient estate. In plain English, the road belonged to my property, not to whoever owned the dirt around it, and selling that dirt to a corporation did not erase it. It had been recorded at the county 11 months before I was old enough to remember anything, and it had been sitting in a fireproof box, while men in Manhattan called it unsupported. But that was not the thing that made me sit down on my stool at 9 at night with my heart going. Underneath the deed was a folded engineering plat from 1968, when the state ran a utility and service corridor up the back of the valley. It showed a buried service line and an easement corridor. crossing the southeast corner of my land, with legal access rights already granted and never abandoned. I had known about the corridor my whole life. There is a concrete marker in the weeds behind my scrap rack, and my father used to mow around it. What I had never done was hold that plat next to the public site plan for North Ridge that the county had posted for public review in the spring. I did it that night on the bench, corner to corner, with a straight edge. And the line they had drawn for their emergency infrastructure tie-in, the connection that any campus of that size is required to have and cannot open without, ran through the southeast corner of my land, not near it, through it, along the one corridor in the entire valley that already carried the legal rights to do that job, because every other route would cross wetland buffers, or the state parcel or the rail spur. If my paper was right, Ashbourne Meridian could not simply erase me from a map. They needed me. And somebody in that company had drawn a survey that pretended I was not there. 90 miles south? Though I did not know it until much later, Genevieve Ashbourne was doing a version of the same work in a glass room with better lighting. She had gone into her building at 7 that morning in a borrowed blouse and told exactly one person what she wanted. Margot Sinclair was 44 years old, ran the independent legal function, reported to the board rather than to any executive, and had a reputation for being the least charming, useful person in the company. Genevieve asked her for the complete North Ridge file, not the summary, not the deck. Everything, including every version of every survey, and the approval chain on each one. It took Margot 2 days, and what she found was not exotic. The site plan filed with the county in the spring showed my right-of-way, drawn correctly, exactly where my grandfather graded it. The internal survey used to drive acquisition, valuation, and the executive summary given to the board did not show it. It did not show it as disputed or under review. It simply did not show it, as though the line had never been recorded at all, and the parcel was rendered clean and unencumbered and cheap. 3 other small parcels along the north boundary had received the same treatment, and the approval block on every one of those internal revisions carried the sign-off of one office. Sterling's, none of it required a criminal mastermind, and I have never wanted to make Sterling into more of a villain than he was. Stripped of the vocabulary, what he had done was this. He had knowingly ignored recorded rights that were inconvenient. He had used the certainty of legal cost to pressure people who could not spend $100,000 to defend 12. He had presented a materially cleaner risk profile of North Ridge to his own board than the facts supported, and he had buried the contingency costs of the corridor problem so the project would clear its approval threshold. 4 things, every one of them ordinary. Together they had ground up 8 families and were coming for a 9th. And the motive was almost sad in how small it was. North Ridge was $600 million, the largest development the company had ever self-financed, and it was Sterling's. He had championed it, staffed it, and staked his name to it, because Genevieve was the controlling owner and the chair, and the only path to the chief executive's chair for a cousin from the other side of the family was to deliver something so large and so clean that the board would have no choice. If North Ridge came in on time and under budget, he became inevitable. If it stalled for a redesign, he became a man who had once tried. He made it about me. He told two directors, in the tone of a man reluctantly raising a concern about someone he loves, that the chair had been through a distressing night alone on a mountain road, that she had spent 5 hours in the custody of a stranger, that she had come back changed, and that she was now reopening a fully approved $600 million project on the strength of a conversation with the man who had picked her up. He used the word vulnerable. He used the phrase understandably shaken. He never once said she was wrong. He only said, gently, that she was compromised, which is the more effective thing to say about a woman in a room of that kind, and he knew it. She did not fight it emotionally, which I respect more than I can say, because I would have. She did not defend her judgment, because defending your judgment is admitting it is on trial. Instead, she asked Margot to schedule a special meeting of the full board for the following Wednesday, with independent audit present, and she let Sterling keep talking for 8 more days. He wrote a memo. He circulated a summary of local land matters that described the north boundary as fully resolved. Every one of those documents went into a folder with his name on it, and he built the folder himself, page by page, because he was certain he was winning. And on the Monday of that week, my phone rang while I was under a car. And it was her, and she asked me to come to Manhattan on Wednesday morning and to bring every original document I had. Not copies, originals, in the box, with the county stamps, and the 1968 plat, and every envelope I had kept by date like a man who knew he was outgunned. I drove the pickup down. 4 hours and 20 minutes, and I parked it in a garage on 53rd that charged me $68, which I paid in cash and did not enjoy. I had thought about renting a suit. I stood in a rental shop in Kingston for 6 minutes on Tuesday afternoon, and then I walked out because I understood something about the room I was walking into. If I arrived in borrowed clothes, I would spend the entire meeting being a man in borrowed clothes, and everything I said would be filtered through the costume. So I wore what I own, a clean-pressed shirt, my good dark jacket that is 8 years old, and my work boots, cleaned but still my work boots. I brought my father's box under my arm like a lunch pail. The lobby of the Ashbourne Meridian building is 4 stories of glass and pale stone, and it is designed, I am certain, to make you aware of your shoes. I got 12 feet in before a young woman with a tablet intercepted me and asked, kindly, if I was there for the mechanical rooms, and directed me toward the freight entrance on 49th. I said no thank you, I was expected upstairs, and she said, still kindly, that she would need to verify that. While she verified it, a man in a beautiful gray suit slowed down beside me, looked at the box and the boots, and said, "Are you on the wrong floor, friend?" I said, I did not know yet. He laughed like we had traded a joke and got in the elevator without me. Sterling was in the corridor, outside the boardroom, when I came out on 31, and he had clearly been waiting to see me arrive, because his face was ready. He shook my hand, which surprised me, and he held on a half-second too long. Then he told an assistant in front of me to put a chair for our visitor at the back of the room by the credenza, since seating at the table was reserved for directors and counsel. It was such a small piece of choreography. It was also perfect, and I understood I was meant to sit there for 2 hours as a demonstration of where I belonged. But before the meeting, he took me into a smaller conference room with a door that closed, and he had a folder ready on the table, and he slid it across with 2 fingers. $250,000. In exchange, I would convey the right-of-way outright, release all claims, and sign a confidentiality agreement covering all communications and observations related to the company, its personnel, and the North Ridge Project, past and future. I looked at that number a long time. I want to be honest about that too. $250,000 is more than 3 times what my property and equipment are worth on any honest day. It is my daughter's college paid outright with a cushion. It is the 20-year-old truck replaced and the roof on the house and the sleep of a man who has not slept properly since August. He knew all of that. He had looked me up. He knew there was a single father with a 15-year-old and a business loan. And he believed, with total confidence, that such a man bends, and that the only remaining question was the size of the number. I slid it back across the table. He smiled. He was not even angry yet. "Don't let your pride become a stupid financial decision," he said. "Sentiment is expensive. In 6 months you'll have legal fees and no shop, and your daughter will ask you why." "You still think the problem is the price," I said. He did not have an answer for that. Not a real one. He stood, and he buttoned his jacket, and for the first time since he had stepped out of that 12th SUV onto my gravel, he looked at me as though I were a variable rather than a category. Then he went into that boardroom, and, because he still believed he was the smartest person in it, he talked for 40 minutes. Genevieve let him. That was the part I did not understand until it was happening. She sat at the head of the table in a navy suit with her hands folded, and she let her cousin build the entire structure himself, while I sat in a chair by the credenza, with a box on my knees. He walked the directors through the north boundary, as fully resolved. He described me by name as the owner of a small automotive repair operation with no strategic significance to the project. He said the re-examination had been prompted by an unfortunate personal episode. He said twice that there was no encumbrance of any consequence on the parcel in question. Every sentence was a nail he was driving into his own floor. Then Margot Sinclair asked for the screen. She put the county filing up first. The one submitted in the spring, the public one, the legal one. She let the room look at it for a moment, and she pointed with a pen at a thin line, running from the frontage lane up through the northeast corner, the recorded right-of-way, drawn correctly, labeled correctly, dated 1987. Then she split the screen and put up the internal acquisition survey, the one used to value my property, and to brief that very board, the one bearing the approval stamp of Sterling's office. Same parcel, same scale, same everything. The line was gone. Then Genevieve spoke for the first time in 19 minutes, and she asked me to come to the table. I walked up the length of that room in my work boots, and I set my father's box down on wood that was probably worth more than my building, and I opened it, and I laid out the 1987 instrument with the county stamp, and beside it the folded plat from 1968. Margot had already had them authenticated against the county records the week before. She said so on the record. And then Genevieve turned the screen to the approved North Ridge design and asked the room's own engineering director, who was sitting 2 chairs down, one question. Where does the emergency infrastructure tie-in run? He looked at it. He looked at the plat. He was quiet for about 4 seconds, and then he said, to his credit, plainly and out loud that it ran along the 68 corridor, that the corridor was the only alignment on the site that already carried the legal rights required for that connection, that every alternative route crossed either the wetland buffer, the state parcel, or the active rail spur, and would require a new design, new permits, a new hearing cycle, and, in his estimate, 14 to 18 months of delay on a project carrying $11 million a year in financing cost. And that corridor crossed my land. The man Sterling had called a mechanic of no strategic significance was holding the one legal key to the connection without which $600 million of concrete could not open its doors. He had not merely underestimated me. He had spent 2 years actively erasing from the record the very fact that made me matter, which meant that when it surfaced as his handwriting. Here is where I think the room actually turned, though, and it had nothing to do with leverage. A director asked me directly what I wanted. I had thought about the answer for 4 hours in the truck. I could have named a number with a lot of zeros in it, and no one in that room could have stopped me, and every person there expected me to. What I said was that I wanted 4 things: that the recorded right of way be formally acknowledged, that every pressure action against me stop, in writing, immediately, that the other landowners along the north boundary get an honest reassessment and the chance to renegotiate, and that, if Ashbourne Meridian wanted to use the corridor across my land, they come and negotiate for it like 2 parties who are equal, because they were going to find that they were. Then, Genevieve delivered the last thing, and it was the piece that took my legs out from under me because it was about me, and it meant I had been wrong about my own importance in the best possible way. She told the board that the independent audit of North Ridge had not been opened after the night her car broke down. It had been authorized 11 days before. The reason she had been driving alone on a mountain road at midnight with no assistant and no itinerary was that she had come from a private meeting with the independent auditors and the outside counsel, arranged off the corporate calendar, precisely because she did not know how far into her own building the problem went. That was why she watched the mirror. That was why she would not let me call anyone. I did not create the scandal. I did not uncover it. A woman who was already 3 moves in had her car die on the one stretch of road with no signal, and the man who stopped happened to be the 9th name on a list she had not yet been able to prove, holding in a fireproof cabinet the recorded original that connected her suspicions to a specific office. I was not the hero of the investigation. I was the piece of physical evidence that had been missing, and I had been sitting on it for 2 months, thinking I was simply a man about to lose everything. The vote was not dramatic. That is worth saying, because I think people expect a door to fly open and men in windbreakers to come through it. Nobody came through the door. The board voted 11-1, with 1 abstention, to suspend Sterling Ashbourne from all authority over North Ridge and from his executive functions pending completion of the independent audit, to refer the survey discrepancies to outside counsel, and to place the north boundary acquisitions under review. There were no handcuffs. The audit would take 14 months and end in a settlement and a resignation and a non-disclosure that I am told he fought hard for. At the door he stopped and turned and looked at me, and he asked, "You think you won?" His voice was perfectly level. That is the thing I remember most. I don't think about it that way, I said. I just wanted you to stop deciding that people with less money than you have fewer rights than you. And he stood there for a second. And I want to tell you, he said something cutting. Because that would make a better story. He did not. He had nothing at all. He turned and went down the corridor, and that was the last time I ever saw him in person. Genevieve offered to buy the shop that afternoon. She offered a number so far above any honest appraisal that I actually laughed out loud in a hallway on the 31st floor. And she smiled, and I think she had known I would refuse, and had made the offer anyway, so that it would be on the table and not hanging over us. I told her no. I told her that if I sold, then every hard thing about that month became a payday. And I did not want the story of my life to be that a man got lucky when a rich woman's car broke down. So we did it the other way, which took 9 weeks and 4 lawyers and 2 site visits. Ashbourne Meridian formally acknowledged the 1987 right-of-way. They negotiated a corridor use agreement for the southeast easement at a fair market rate, paid annually, indexed, with a term of 30 years. They funded 100% of the relocation of my scrap rack, my compressor pad, and the drainage work the corridor required. And they upgraded my lane to a hard surface because their trucks would be using the first 200 feet of it. And they guaranteed the continued operation of Pierce Auto and fabrication in writing, which is a sentence my father would not have believed. Genevieve also ordered every land transaction associated with North Ridge reopened. 8 families along that north boundary were contacted by Margot Sinclair's office and told in language they could actually read what had been done to the surveys. 4 who had sold under pressure were offered the difference between what they got and what the parcels were worth, without the manufactured access problem. 2 who were in litigation had their cases settled inside a month. The widow of the man who died waiting received the correction in his name, and her son sent me a note about it that I keep in the same box as the deed. The revenge in the end was not that I became wealthy. I did not. I make a decent living, and I always have. The revenge was that a company worth billions of dollars had to send its people up my gravel lane into a 9x12 office with a motel couch and a loud space heater, and sit across a workbench from a man in a dirty jacket and negotiate as equals, because that was the only door available to them. A few months later, Pierce Auto and Fabrication was still standing where it had always stood, now surrounded on 3 sides by graded ground and the steel skeleton of a distribution campus. I repainted the sign myself in April rather than replace it. Same green, same white letters, because the board was still good, and because I have never seen the sense in throwing away something that only needs attention. Business got better, honestly, in the dullest possible way. 200 contractors working, a mile away, all need brake work eventually. One morning, in June, I heard engines in the yard. I came out through the bay with a rag over my shoulder and looked up, and there was a black SUV coming around the tree line, and behind it a second. I felt my jaw set. I am not made of stone. Some sounds have meaning now. But the second one turned into the site road and kept going, and only one came up my lane, and it stopped, and no one in a dark coat got out to scan my roof lines. Genevieve stepped down from the driver's seat by herself, with 2 paper cups of coffee balanced in one hand. She looked at the shop and at the freshly painted sign and she said, "I think I found the way on my own this time." I took the cup she held out. "Progress," I said. And if you imagine a camera pulling back from that gravel pad, you would see one small green and white building sitting untouched in the middle of $600 million of somebody else's plans. That night on the mountain, I did not help a billionaire. I helped a woman who was stranded and cold. And it was precisely because I never knew who she was that she finally found out exactly what kind of man I am.